Okay, so welcome to our class on our session on Tehillim. It's not really a class, um, on the Psalms, and we are up to Psalm 22. And like many of these Psalms, the introductions are mysterious, but this one is beautifully mysterious, if that makes anything any better. It starts out Lam Natseach, and we said before that probably does mean the conductor. The Natseach is the person who would keep things going. So that does sound like a conductor. That makes sense. But then it says Al Ayelet Hashachar Mizmor David. Okay, so Mizmor David is the attribution. So that says that this is one of the songs that was sung by David HaMelech himself, by King David himself. But then when it says Al Ayelet Hashachar, that means literally, that means literally the, it's not a gazelle. It's not a gazelle. It's some kind of he says, the beloved doe that appears like the dawn. Well, it it either is the beloved doe, it's the doe that appears at like the dawn, or it's the doe that appears at the dawn. It's a beautiful romantic name. Um, And here he gives he says in the translation I've been using, for the conductor about Israel, a beloved doe that appears like the dawn, right? Well, that's very nice, and I think that's probably from Rashi, I'm going to guess. Um, but I don't know if it's accurate. Ayelet HaShachar, some sources say that this doe of the dawn is a kind of instrument, right? So this was supposed to be played on whatever this Ayelet Shahar, this instrument called the Doe of the Dawn, or alternatively, it's some sort of musical notation. Um, I think I kind of imagine it as being like a morning raga, right? If you know anything about Indian music, right? There are certain tunes that are there's certain tunes that are done in melodies that are appropriate for the morning. So it could be that this is Ayel Tashachar might mean like the doe in the morning is a kind of melody or a set of melodies that they might have used. So I don't know. That's the bottom line. The first line is very, very famous for many reasons. But Eli Eli lama azavtani, says, my God, why have you forsaken me? And one of the things that I think is most striking about this is that we saw in the last psalm that David HaMelech says about himself, I'm God's Moshiach, I'm God's anointed, I'm the king, God put a gold crown on my head. And here we have an entirely different experience. It's like we've entered into another world, and now we're in his very personal emotional world. And in his very personal emotional world, he's able to say, Eli, Eli, lama azabtani. He says, my God, why have you forsaken me? And he had a lot of reasons. So you might think, oh, okay, if you're God's Mashiach, right? You're God's Messiah. You're God's chosen one, right? And you were chosen to be king, right? Maybe like life would be good. That would seem reasonable that life would be good. But he did not have a good life. All right. His father-in-law wanted to kill him. Everybody doubted his family background, right? So he was constantly being doubted. Um, his his son wanted to kill him. His father-in-law wanted to kill him. Um, he had a pretty tough, and he had lots of enemies. His own wife thought he was an idiot, right? He goes dancing and she's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I'm married to this guy," right? So he, honestly, he's not having such an easy life. And so it makes sense that he might say, he may say, Eli, Eli, lama azabtani? God, why have you forsaken me? Rachok mishuati divrei shakti. Says, you remain far from my salvation and my cries of distress. And sha'agati is really crying. It's wailing, right? That I'm wailing to you, right? And you're far and you're far from my salvation. It's like you're not even hearing me. It says Elohai ekra yomam v'lo ta'aneh laila v'lo demi ali. He says, I call out to you each day and you don't answer. And at night, it says, lo demi ali, it says, I have no silence. It's not just that I'm not silent. It's that I have no silence. I have no serenity. I have no peace. I have no tranquility. It's not that I don't want to be silent. It's that I can be silent. I don't know if you've ever had this experience. I had it a couple of years ago when I had COVID, actually. I had COVID. I found myself laying in bed and going like this. Uh, uh, uh. And I couldn't understand why I was doing this. Like I don't think I wanted to do it. I don't think I wanted to be quiet, but there was something inside of me that was just expressing the absolute misery. And that's
But
how
doesn't that happen when you're in pain?
I was in pain.
Yeah.
I was just miserable, I was just,
Uh,
and I guess when people are in pain, they just do that. And so
yeah.
so he says, I had no silence. And the word dumia, okay, is not just silence in the sense, normal word for silence is quietness, is shtika, right? Shtika means to be quiet, shut up, right? Zip your lips. Dumia is related to dam, to blood, to the calmness in the heart, right? So I have no calmness in the heart. I have no tranquility. I have no serenity. And thus I'm not silent. V'ata kadosh yoshed tilot Yisrael. He says, and you are still the one who is holy. Yoshev tilot Israel, and you sit upon the praises of Israel. Right? It's a beautiful, beautiful image of God sort of sitting on the praises of, on the praises of people. That, you know, he's you I feel like you've abandoned me. I cry and you don't seem to hear me. I I cry by day and I can't be silent even at night. But still, Yatakadosh, you are the one who is holy. You are the one who is beyond this reality, the word kadosh means completely, entirely other from anything we can know. So you are the one who is holy. Okay, Yoshev Tehilot Israel. He says here, you wait for the praises from Israel. I don't think that's the image. I think the image is of God kind of seated on the praises. It says, Batchu avotenu. So our fathers trusted in you. Batchu utfaltemo. He says they trusted you and they relied on you and you saved them. It says, Elecha za'aku. They cried out to you, right? They cried out to you. That's the language. If you look at the Torah, when talking about in Egypt, right? It says that za'aku, they cried out, they cried out to God, and God heard. It says, Ben nimlatu. And they cried out to you and they were delivered. B'cha batchu v'lo boshu. He says they put their trust in you and they were not put to shame. This by the way is something that I've noticed recently in the Tehillim, in the Psalms, is that he talks a lot about shame. Uh, and this boshet, this and that, and asking God to please save him from shame. I never thought about that, but I mean, it's one of the most horrible experiences a person has. If I asked everybody, if I said to you, like, okay, I want you to, sit down and think about the 10 worst things that ever happened to you. I'm going to guess that many of them would involve feelings of being ashamed, right? Um, it's not just, the bad things that happen to us, that this accident happened or that accident happened, or we had this sickness, but the shame that's associated with those things is the thing that really is indelible in us and which really stains us. So he says, please, says they put their trust in you and they weren't put to shame. And now he talks about himself. He said, the Anochi and me, because that was my ancestors, my ancestors. Because one of the questions he has to be asking himself is like, okay, if they called out and you answered them, and they called out and you made sure that they didn't suffer embarrassment, is there anything more embarrassing than your own child rebelling against you? Is there anything more? There's a lot of shame in that, right? What kind of parent am I? If my child rebels against, never mind that it's very common, never mind it happens all the time, right? Never mind that it's really nothing to be ashamed of. But still, there's a part of us that goes like that, and he says, "Va'anochi," and me. So, and me here is they were like this, and me, tolat, below ish. I am a worm and not a human being. Now, first, first of all, how can David HaMelech say, I'm a worm and not a human being? So, so the rabbis have a tough time with this one for obvious reasons, right? Because one is not supposed to think evil of oneself, right? And worms don't sound very good. So one way of saying this is that he's really okay. This is what we call a rabbinic stretch. So the rabbinic stretch is that it's not bad to be a worm, right? Worms are very powerful. Worms have the power of their mouth, right? All the power of a worm is in its mouth, right? With its mouth, it can do amazing things, right? It can chew through books, right? Anybody who has ever had a bookworm in their home, right? They can chew through books. They can chew through seashells. They can chew through all sorts of, all sorts of stuff. So they have this, yes.
I was going to say there's also a Baal Shem Tov quote, I can't remember exactly where he says, even a worm serves God with its whole being. So there's still an element of serving God, even if you are a worm, so I just
Okay.
throw that out there,
Okay.
you know.
Right. A worm, I could say that a worm does his job, right? I can't necessarily say that I do my job, for the creator, but the worm is doing his job for the creator and he's doing it just fine. And he's doing it with excellence. And he does it with his mouth. So that's one way of understanding it. I think that probably the better way of understanding this, given the next line, is where he says, "Chirpat Adam uvizoyam." Says, and says an object of humans, an object of scorned by men, vizoyam, and despised by people, right? Is that I see myself that while my ancestors may have been something very special and God would pay attention to them, me, I'm not so great. So, so it's actually a bit of a struggle. On the one hand, we don't want to think of ourselves as bad, and we shouldn't think of ourselves as bad because if we think of ourselves as bad, we're likely to behave badly because we'll think, well, bad people, what do? They do bad stuff. So that's who I am. So you don't want to go there. At the same time, right? You don't want to walk around like he did in the last, right? In the last psalm, going, I'm the anointed one of God. I wear a silver crown. God gave me this silver crown, this gold crown, right? You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that either. So here he's able to see himself, at least in this light, right? In this light, and from this perspective, and in this moment, says, I'm a worm, and I am an object of scorn, despised by men. Says, Kol ra'ai v'yaligoni, says, everybody who looks at me, mocks me. Yaftiru b'safa, I love this one. They dismiss me with their lips. I think this is the Middle Eastern gesture. It's this one. There's a Middle Eastern gesture that you just kind of purse your lips a little bit, and it means I'm done with you. Right? And then says, and what do they do? V'yaniu rosh. They shake their heads. Right? Right? This is how this is how people deal with me. Right? They don't even talk to me. Right? They just look at me and they're completely dismissive. I think everybody has had this experience, right? Of somebody just dismissing you in this way, not taking you seriously, humiliating you by treating you as if you're completely unimportant. Now he switches gears a little bit. Gol el Adonai yifaltehu. Says the person, literally, he gives it as commit himself to God. It means, literally as roll to God, like turn yourself over to God. I guess that's a good translation, right? Turn yourself over to God, Yavtehu, and he will rescue him. And he says he will save him, for he delights in him. So you shouldn't think that God has given up on you, right? It could be that you are a worm and not a human being, that people treat you with great shame, that they dismiss you, they don't think you're important, they don't think you're worthwhile, that for whatever reason. But if you turn yourself over to Hashem, He'll save you, because because He takes pleasure in you, because He wants you, whether the world wants you or not, and the expectation that everybody's going to be happy with you and everybody's going to love you and that's not a reasonable expectation. The world doesn't work that way. It's not necessarily going to be that way. But if you give yourself over to God, God will take pleasure in you, will love you. And now he speaks to God. Ki ata gochi mibeten. Mavtichi so that's nice. It says al shdei imi. It says, you brought me from the womb and you made me secure. You secured me at my mother's breast. It says, God, I understand you've been with me from the very beginning. You've always been with me even in the womb, even at my mother's breast. It says, Alecha hashlachti mirachem. Says, mibeten imi. Says, Eliata. Says, Alecha hashlachti mirachem. Says, literally, I was thrown. I was sent to you from the womb, right? You were waiting for me from the womb. You were right there. Mibet animi says, even inside my mother's womb, is Eliata, you were my God. So you were my God from before. You were the one who was waiting to catch me, right, when I came out of the womb, and you were with me in the womb. Al tirchach mimeni. He says, don't be far away from me. Kitzara krova ve'en ozer. Because troubles are so near and there's no one to help. Right? Sometimes this is like just such a beautiful little prayer. Al tirchach mimeni. Don't be far away from me. Because my troubles are right here. I don't, I, it's not okay for you to be so far away from me because I have all this stuff going on and I need you right here. I need you to come and I need you to be with me. Sivavuni parim rabim says they surround me like bulls. Abirei Bashan, like the bulls of Bashan. Bashan was known for its especially robust cattle, right? Whatever it says, the cows of Bashan, the cattle of Bashan, right? Bashan, I think, is up north. Yeah, I think it's up north in towards the Galil and like the Galil and the Golan and up towards Syria. And these were like big bulls. This is a kitruni. It says, and they surround me. And interesting, kitruni could also mean they encircle me, but it also means that they crown me. And it's interesting, in the last psalm, he talked about the gold crown. And he talked about this golden crown, and now he's crowned, so to speak, by angry bulls, right? These angry bulls, circling him. Patsu alai pihem. They open their mouths at me. Arye torev shoag. It says shoeg. He says and the lions that maul and shoeg roar, right? So it's like he's going for all the animal metaphors, right? So you got, he's got the giant bulls surrounding him. He's got lions that are yelling, and they want to torif. They want to tear him apart, and they're roaring at him. Kamayim nishpachti says, I've poured out like water. Poured out like water. Right? I got nothing left. Right? Like water poured out. I got no energy. I have no strength. I got no backbone. I got no anything. Tidpardu kol atzmotai. He says here, my limbs feel out of joint. Yeah, I guess it's actually limbs, but my bones are out of joint. My bones are disconnected. Right? My bones become separated, disconnected, like one of those, remember in the old days we had those little figures that had a little button in the bottom and you would press the button and they would go limp, right? Like that, So it's like that, I've lost all of the tension, right? All the tension in my body. I'm just falling. I'm falling apart here. So Yad libi kudonag names b'toch mai. It says, and my heart is like wax and has melted within me. Right? So he's falling apart. Okay, I'm falling apart here. I'm there's nothing left in me. Yavesh kacheres kochi. My strength has dried like clay. And sort of, right? Like now it becomes useless, right? If you've ever tried to make anything with clay, if it dries too quick, right? It can't be made into anything. Veloshani midbak makotai. And says my tongue sticks to my palate. Right? It's because I can't speak. V'afar mavet tishpateni. Says, and I'm lowered into the dust of death. Okay, he's describing, if you want a description of what it means to be depressed, this is a pretty good one. Right? A pretty good one. Right? Surrounded by bulls and angry things, and you're drained, and your heart is turned to wax. Your heart is just melted out of you. It just doesn't have any strength anymore. And now it says, now we have more things surrounding me. Kisaveni klavim, dogs hem me in. Dogs surround me, And again, in the ancient Near East and in the modern Near East, dogs are not a good thing. While many of us here keep dogs and we love dogs and dogs are really sweet and cute and everything else, that is not how they were perceived or are perceived in most places in the Middle East even today. Adat Merim the Hikifuni, a gang of criminals close around me. Ka'ari yadi ragli. It says, and like a lion, they crush my hands and feet. Right? It's actually interesting. It doesn't now for you people who are interested in comparative religion. So Christians read this verse very differently. And they read it as instead of reading it as kari, like a lion, they read it as kari, which can also mean torn, right? Yaday raglai, my hands and feet torn or pierced, right? So for Christians, this is actually a verse about Jesus and the crucifixion. I don't think there's a lot of reason to think that, but that's the that if you ever read a verse and says my hands and feet are pierced, this is probably the verse. Asaper calls Matai. He says, I reveal the pain in my bones. I speak of the pain in my bones. He says, and my enemies look on, right, with satisfaction. Right? They just it says, they just stand there and look at me. Right? My enemies just they look, and even if I cry in pain, even if they see me suffering, they have no interest. This is Bagdala. He says they want to divide my clothing, and on my levush, on my uniform, right, on my royal clothing, right. This is not just your clothing, right. So dividing, they're looking at me suffering, and they're thinking, who's gonna get his boots? Who's going to get his cloak? Who's going to get his pants? Who's going to get his shirt? Right? And they're doing a lottery for my royal garments, right? For my important clothes, right? For the important clothes, they're gonna draw lots to see who gets them. Says, God, please do not be distant. Says, see what my situation is, right? My enemies, people just dismiss me. People just dismiss me. I'm surrounded by all these animalistic people who behave like dogs, people behave like angry wolves, people behave like cruel lions. Please, says, Ayaluti be'ezrati chusha. Says, you're my strength. Right? Be'ezrati chusha. Hurry to help me. Hatzil mecherev nafshi. Says, save me from death by the sword. And literally, Hatzil mecherev nafshi, save my soul from the sword. Miyad kelev yechidati. It says, and my yechidah. So there are different words for the soul. So nefesh, right, like the word nafs in Arabic, refers to the self in terms of the self as related to physicality, right? It says, and so he says, protect that self, that soul, from the cherev, from the sword. He says, but yechidati, which means literally my individuality. Literally, that's what it means, my individuality. That thing which is uniquely me. See, our physicality we share with one another to a large extent, right? It overlaps, right? We have basically the same, if you imagine, we have basically the same physical structure, which means that the spiritual interface between our bodies and our spirits are going to be relatively similar. So truth is, our nefeshes, right, our nifashot, are going to be relatively similar. And of course, we know that when it comes, if we have a little discussion about our nafs, right, we talk a little bit about, how our kind of inner self that we're used to talking about works, we're going to find a lot of commonalities. But then there's this other part of this, the chidat, right? The chida that's completely unique to us, right? That's absolutely unique. And it says, and that spared from the dogs. And I'm not sure why he used the image of the dog, but I kind of imagine dog is a very good is a good metaphor for a more spiritual enemy, because dogs kind of, if you've ever seen dogs, ever seen wolves hunt, for example, you know, they they kind of mess with their they kind of mess with their they first of all they hunt in packs. That's the first thing. And they hunt in packs, and they hunt with coordination. A sword is yielded essentially by one person, but dogs kill as a group. And I think very often our spiritual damage is not done by so much by an individual, but by an environment that we're in, that we're surrounded by that environment. And dogs kind of like, they bite at the heels of they try to terrify whatever creature it is, and get it into and kick it into freeze mode. And once they do that, then they come in for the attack. And I think spiritual enemies often do that too, right? They kind of push at us and hope that we're going to become so disheartened that we can't move, that we're going to become paralyzed. Hoshi Eini mipi arye. Rescue me from the lion's mouth, mikarve remim. And from when I faced the horns, he says here bisons. I don't know that remim is actually bisons. I'm not sure what reem are. Somebody have to look it up. I saw earlier somebody else translated it as oryx, but oryx don't seem to be very violent animals. But then if they weren't violent animals, why would they have such huge horns? That's
Yeah.
yes.
Bison are a North American animal. But I think what happened here, there is an animal like a water buffalo, which is
Right.
found in Europe. I think for a long time, bison here were called buffalo. And then now we call them bison because that's more correct. And my guess is the translator may have corrected, quote unquote, buffalo to bison in the Middle East, which really should be buffalo.
Got it.
You follow what I'm saying?
Got
they
it.
kind of, without realizing it, retroact. Yeah, because what we had in North America really aren't buffalo. They were called that by the early explorers, but they're really a different species.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
so we're talking water buffalo, which have horns.
yeah, they do it.
They're like an ox.
Yes, I've met water buffaloes many times, and I taught my daughter a very important lesson: never look a water buffalo in the eye. Just telling you, I tried this myself. Don't ever do it. Okay. So if this is a water buffalo, then this makes perfect sense. Because it says when I face the horns, right? It says the karnei ramim, and he's saying, save me from the horns of water buffaloes. Water buffaloes are very ornery creatures. I will declare, it says, asapra shimcha le'echi. It says, so my brain is not working today. Asapra shimcha le'echai, betokacha ahaleka. My brain is not working. So I will declare your glory to my brothers. I will praise you in the assembly. So now he's saying, listen, please rescue me. And if you rescue me, he says, "Asapra shimcha lechai." I'm gonna proclaim your glory. I'm going to talk about your glory to my brothers. B'tochacha lecha. It says, I'll praise you, right? B'tochacha, in publicly, right? Among in the public. Yireh Adonai halaluhu, and those who fear God, says, will praise him, right? Now he's it says, you who fear God. Now he's shifting, right? Now he's talking to his audience, right? He was just talking to God, and now he's talking to his audience. Yireh Adonai halaluhu. It says, you people who fear God, praise him. Kol Zerah Yaakov kabdu. All the descendants of Yaakov, says, give him glory. Guru mimenu kol Zerah Yisrael. All of the offspring of Israel, be in awe of him. Kilo vaza. Because he has not, because he hasn't, a good translation, yeah. He says he hasn't scorned, right? Vaza is like, is like disrespect 10, times 10, right? That's disrespect, right? He hasn't scorned velo shikatz, right? Shikatz comes from, to treat like an insect, right? To treat like a bug, right? So he hasn't held anybody in contempt. Says enut ani, he answers the poor man. Velo hastir, says panav mimenu, and he does not hide his face from him. Uveshavo elav shamia, but listened when he called out. So this idea of enut ani says that he hears the cry of the poor is repeated a number of times in Tehillim, and there's even a psalm which is known as the Tfilat Ani, the prayer of the poor man, and it's not just a poor man. It's not just, okay, yeah, I happen not to be poor, so that's it. My prayer is never going to be heard. But on the contrary, if I make myself like a poor man, if I approach God as an impoverished beggar, if I approach God with without my arrogance, without my sense of entitlement, without my dreams of grandeur that somehow or another I control the world, that's what it means to approach God as an ani, as a person who is poor, and he will hear that. He's not going to turn his face away from him. But listen when he called out. And this is an important point. God never leaves us, right? The image is never one of God. He says, why are you so far away? Is God ever far away? No, God is not far away. We understand that the closest metaphor we can come to when we can't feel God in our lives is that God turns his face away from us, which means he's there, right? But his face is turned away from us. We're unable to interface with God. We're unable to see his presence and to have that personal one-to-one relationship. And there's some way in which we are separated and we're lost, but it's not that he's far away, but that would feel very far away. I saw the other day, I saw on a video, there was a Middle Eastern couple, and there was this Russian woman, and he wanted to talk to the Russian woman, and so he turned to his wife, and he turned and started talking to the Russian woman, and turned away from the wife, and his wife said, "No, look at me and talk to her. Right? Look at me and talk to her. And it was very difficult for him to do that, right? Because that connection had been broken, right? The connection of face to face, right? She's still there, right? She's still there. She's still listening. She's still interested in what he has to say. But when he's looking in this direction and she's there and he's got the back of his head to her, it's very difficult for her to relate to him and for him to relate to her. And so here he says, please don't hide your, right? It says he didn't hide his face from him, but listen when he called out. So we can trust in God. We can trust in God that even when we feel very distant, he won't hide his face. If we approach as a poor man, if we approach as a poor woman, if we approach with simplicity and with humility, he'll turn his face in our direction. So we'll continue next week because it is 45 minutes. And thoughts? Lainey?
Is the connection that I made about the dogs is that there's so many. I'm reading Kings now in a different class. Is that like the worst curse you can give somebody is the dogs are going to lick up your blood.
Oh yeah.
You know, so not the dog as predator, but the dog as kind of
Scavenger.
Yeah.
Which is worse, right? That's that's very interesting, right? The lions will get you, and then the dog, which of course is sort of what happens, right? Lions, kill things, they eat things, and then the hyenas come and take their part. And then the vultures come and they finish it off.
I just wanted to say about like thinking that the whole world is against you or thinking that you're some special person. Essentially it's the same behavior. Like essentially what you said, it's like you think that you can you're controlling the world, that everything is about you, or like using like seeing the world as a mirror or something. Like I see that, like maybe people don't think of it that way, but when you're in that funk where you think everything is against you and like the whole world just went to a party and like they were talking about ways to like mess with you and stuff, like that's the same thing as like thinking that you're special and like you can like have an a-hole pass to some stuff, right? Like it's like making things about you. So I've had the privilege of seeing that. I'm speaking from experience, so I just want to point that out. That like sometimes you feel like it's not like, but if you feel like you're like the wretch and everything is against you, that's like the similar thing as making everything about you and thinking that you control the world, when really it like has probably nothing to do with you at all.
Yeah, I'll push on that a little bit though. Like I feel like everybody is going to have this feeling at some point or another, and it's like sometimes we're paranoid, and sometimes it's just that everybody is against us. And it's hard to tell the difference.
Yeah, and sometimes that's ego, because sometimes it isn't about you, and sometimes absolutely extraordinary things you cannot even imagine like are happening right now, and so it's easier to just think, okay, that right. That's like a struggle that I have. Like sometimes everything is against you, and sometimes everyone is that way, right? But not always.
Sometimes
information that you have,
sometimes we have friends, shockingly.
But it like I think it's kind of like I don't know how much Facebooking or whatever, but there's a famous picture of Prince William, and the thing is, Prince William like was flipping the bird. But then if you actually saw the real whole thing, you would see that he was holding up his many fingers, and if you looked at it from a certain perspective, it looked like the worst thing ever. And it depends on how you want to see the situation. And I think that life is like that, and you could think that everyone is flipping the bird, or you could be like, oh, maybe I just don't have all the information. It all depends how you regard yourself, fitly, I think, anyway, whatever. What do I know?
This is why Queen Elizabeth always waved like this.
All her
She never separated her fingers. No, really, seriously. So that no finger could ever be, separated. Okay, have a beautiful week, everybody. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. I hope I see some of you on Wednesday. In fact, I hope I see all of you on Wednesday. And bring your friends, bring your enemies, bring your dogs, bring your not your bad dogs, only your good dogs. And okay, have a beautiful week.
You
Bye.
too. Thank you very much.
Welcome.